We'll get started here shortly as everyone's being added. All right, we'll get started. The La Crosse Area Chamber of Commerce welcomes you to our special forum today, focusing on Wisconsin and our area's economic outlook. Before we get started today, I want to recognize our advocacy sponsors: Gunderson Health System, Verve, a credit union, Quick Trip, AT&T Services, ISG, Mayo Clinic Health System, Gensler, and Darylyn Power Cooperative. Today's special forum is sponsored by Wipfli. We want to thank the Wipfli team for sponsoring and attending today. To speak on behalf of Wipfli, I want to introduce you to John Honadell, who is the office leader as well as the audit and accounting leader for the Western Wisconsin market. John has been a CPA for the company for over 30 years. He started in Green Bay and then relocated to the La Crosse offices in 2007. John, welcome.
Thanks, Neil. I appreciate the introduction. And I'd like to, pass along as well my welcome to all of you in joining the special edition of the forum here this afternoon. Wipfli is a full-service CPA and consulting firm, which really creates a logical connection with this program today, given that it's the main speakers are all from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. As Neil said, I've been with Wipfli for over 30 years. And the business world, as many of you know, has changed dramatically over those past few decades. When I started in public accounting, the majority of our focus was really on compliance work, things like tax return preparation, audits, other items of that nature. And over the years, we've evolved really a tremendous amount. We've done so by listening to our clients, identifying where our capabilities overlap with their needs. And we specifically accomplish this by developing expertise in specific industries, which deepens our understanding and capabilities within those industries. As I mentioned, we've evolved a lot. If I tried to give a list of all of the different things that we do for our clients, I could probably chew up most of the hour myself, and certainly I don't want to do that. So I'll just share real quickly some of the main areas that we assist our clients with. One of those is on the personnel side. We can help with personnel selections for management and executive level talent, also with compensation design type of efforts that companies are undergoing. From a technology point of view, we can assist with both management of network infrastructure as well as implementation of new systems, whether it be ERP systems, CRM systems, different things of that nature. We also do things from an operational point of view, helping businesses become more efficient with their processes and items like budgeting and forecasting. And then, of course, we still have our old traditional audit and accounting services that we provide, as well as tax planning, tax preparation, and utilization of tax credits and adoption of new accounting or new tax rules, which certainly this past year, even on the individual side, many of you, I'm sure, have experienced the tremendous amount of change that's occurred with all of the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pace of change certainly has accelerated over these past few decades, and the past year is no exception. COVID-19 has really touched all different aspects of our life, necessitated our ability to be flexible and agile in reacting and responding. And Wipfli does the best that we can every day to continue to provide guidance and assistance to our clients during these uncertain times. So without further delay, I would like to just provide a brief introduction of our speakers today. First speaker will be Secretary Peter Barca, who is the Secretary of the Department of Revenue. Secretary Barca is a lifelong resident of Wisconsin, primarily Kenosha and Summers area down in the southeastern part of the state. He served in the state legislature as a representative of the 64th Assembly District from 1985 to 1993, when he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. He also served several years as the Midwest Regional Administrator for the U.S. Small Business Administration during the Clinton administration, and has spent time as VP and President of Aurora Associates International, an international project management company. He returned to the state legislature in 2009 and then served until his appointment as Secretary of the Department of Revenue by Governor Evers in 2019. Joining Secretary Barca today are Chief Economist John Koskinen, as well as Administrator of the Research and Policy Division, Bob Schmidt. Secretary Barca.
Well, thank you very much, John, and terrific to be with you. And as you know, we're always pleased to have CPAs as part of our operation, and you play such a vital role in terms of our success at the Department of Revenue. But nice to see such a wonderful group of people there. And I see my former cabinet colleague, Senator Brad Pfaff, is on the line. We appreciate that. And Representative Billings, who I serve with in the legislature. And I think Representative Doyle was going to try to make it. I'm not sure if he will. But we're very pleased to be able to share with you quite a bit of information as part of this, what we call Web Roundtable. And John Koskinen, our senior economist, and Bob Schmidt, our administrator for RMP, as you indicated, will share some economic data. I'm going to talk a little bit about the recession in the beginning and the most important thing for curing it, and that's public health success. So I'll talk a little bit about the vaccine, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the governor's budget and the governor's goal to have a Badger bounce back stronger type of initiative through the priorities that he set. Let's see. There we go. So as all of you know, what's caused this recession that we're in was strictly a public health pandemic. And so what's going to bring us out of it is having vaccine success. So the governor, as you know, has made this a top priority. We've been meeting almost weekly in cabinet meetings looking at this, but the governor, being a humble guy, if you were here, he would say what's really caused so much of our success has been our partnerships, whether it be with Crosse County or the community there, whether it be with hospitals, medical clinics. Now the governor has allowed dentists to also give the vaccine, because the goal is to try to move forward as quickly as we possibly can. In this slide, you can see we've had tremendous success. As a matter of fact, over 1 million vaccines were given as of yesterday, which is over 17% of the population, but over 25% of adults, since we have a little less than 4 million adults in Wisconsin. Probably more important than that was that almost 75% of people aged 65 or older have received the vaccine. That's important from a healthcare perspective because, it's older individuals that have comorbidities and are more likely to end up in the emergency rooms. Wisconsin, at this point, ranks first in the nation in terms of the percentage of doses administered. 94% of all vaccines we receive are put in people's arms, compared to about 80% in the nation as a whole. And we also rank first in the Midwestern states in terms of the amount of doses that we've had. We've given out 25,700 vaccines for every 100,000 people in our population. So vitally important in terms of coming out on the backside of the pandemic. I'm going to talk a little bit about our budget overview. So from a small business, entrepreneurship, workforce perspective, education, infrastructure, agriculture, all the things that are important for Wisconsin's economy that the governor is proposing in terms of getting a Badger bounce back better type of effort. But first, I want to just share with you the first bill signed into law by the governor this year actually came out of the Department of Revenue. We're very proud of that. It was Wisconsin Act 1. And what that did was we called it the taxpayer enhancement package, because it was a series of 3 to 4 dozen different items to try to improve things for the taxpayers of our state. The first one was one that is very important for Chamber of Commerce's around the state. Crosse, I'm sure, is no exception. And the governor put it in this first budget. It didn't pass, so I'm glad we passed it as part of Act 1 so that self-employed individuals can deduct their health insurance premiums. They're the only group that could not do so, and obviously it's vitally important. Secondly, one of the changes that realtors and developers came to the Department of Revenue on has to do with the historic renovation tax credit. And what they told us is that if they could utilize this credit and take all 5 years worth of credits in the first year, they could monetize them. And this would lead to far more projects being approved. So we did that administratively, but we wanted to put it in the statute so it would be there permanently. And then, as many of you know, one of the things that came up in the 11th hour was with the Internal Revenue Code changes. So the IRS, for the first time in history, and also for the Department of Revenue, allowed businesses that received the PPP to have a double benefit, to not only not have that count towards taxes, but also to allow them to deduct their expenses. Now, normally, when you receive a grant, you can't deduct, your expenditures because it's not money that of your own that you utilize. But in this case, the governor just felt the pandemic had hit so many businesses so, just so decisively that he really wanted to provide this. But he insisted that we would provide the same thing for the CARES Act grants that the state had administered. I'm going to show you a slide in a few minutes about that. But this was for businesses particularly hard hit because the state of Wisconsin was very focused on businesses that really needed to rebound. Where the PPP, came up so quickly, and like for instance, a hardware shop that's down the block from where I live, he indicated he took the money. He didn't know what the impact was going to be, and he doubled his business during last year. So we wanted to make sure we at least allowed the same kind of benefit for businesses that took the CARES Act, and also for EITC for low-wage workers that work 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year. But maybe the industry only dictates a $10 or $11 an hour wage. So this allows people to claim either 19 or 20 income, whichever is better for them. So this was another provision in Act 1. There were another couple divisions, couple dozen provisions. I won't go through each one of them, but it gives you an idea of that bill that we had enacted just a couple months ago. CARES Act money, Governor Evers had made sure that aside from the healthcare money, which is where most of the money went, obviously from the federal government for testing, setting up contact tracing, and now vaccines. But the second biggest expenditure, over $300 million, went for the We're All In Phase 1 and Phase 2 grant, which we administer actually at the Department of Revenue, the We're All In for restaurants, even the Wisconsin Farm Support Program that came out of the Department of Agriculture that we administered at DOR. So all, over $300 million went back to small businesses to make sure that they would be helped to the fullest degree possible. Now, in terms of this budget, the governor's primary focus in this budget was to bring forward provisions that he thought would help our Badger bounce back, to help small businesses, help economic recovery, help workforce, things of that sort. I won't go through each provision, but some of the major ones are creating a $200 million fund to assist small businesses affected with the pandemic, specifically for retraining and rehiring employees. Next one, near and dear to my heart, $100 million venture capital fund. At Governor Walker's request, I had served on the venture capital task force, and we have recommended exactly this $100 million venture capital fund because this is the one area Wisconsin historically has laid behind is venture capital for new business ventures. Now, at that time, we could only find $25 million, but Governor Evers would like to make the full $100 million investment. Finally, to provide $8 million on a one-time basis for WEDC to award for organizations focused on local and regional economic development. We know oftentimes many of the small businesses can get money much more quickly from a local economic development group than they can through going through the state. So that would be very important, I know, for the La Crosse area in particular. So other economic development provisions that are important, $20 million for supporting training. As we all know, pre-pandemic, the biggest issue for economic development was workforce training, finding enough workers to satisfy the demand of many employers. And I know it was no exception in the La Crosse area. I know in particular the healthcare, the IT area was particularly in need of workers. So the governor knows that, we're only a year or two away from post-pandemic having the same challenges again. So he also provide $8 million for your local workforce development boards, which I'm sure many people in the La Crosse Chamber probably serve on. And then also one other provision that originated through the Department of Revenue, and this was put in the governor's last budget as well, when we had 10 of the 12 largest companies in Wisconsin fly into Madison to meet with us here in the Revenue Building, saying the single biggest thing we could do for economic prosperity was to increase the research and development refundable credit. At 10%, we're kind of in the middle of the pack, but if we double it, as Governor Evers proposed last budget, he's proposing it again, we'll be in that top tier premier level. And the governor, being a former superintendent of schools, certainly believes in research and development. And it's not just for large businesses, even though they were the ones that lobbied for it. One of my dear friends owns a manufacturing company in Racine, and he said that his company would benefit enormously through having this type of credit available. A couple other provisions, and again, I won't read each one, but one of the more important ones, I've served on the WDC board since its inception, and to increase the annual block grant by $10 million, that can go for, community, civic, business development in a given community, and it's done a world of good for so many different communities. Obviously, continued investment in workforce programs, vitally important. Moving on to an item like broadband, which I know is important in the western part of the state. This is one you probably have to advocate quite as strongly about, only because we've seen the leaders in the Democrat and Republican Party indicate they support this. In the governor's last budget, by going forward with this $15 million increase that the governor proposed, we have the largest single investment ever in broadband access. The Governor Evers would propose to almost quadruple it to $200 million. And if we've ever seen a need, it's been during the pandemic, where people are working from home, students are studying from home, and we know long-term, it's just vitally important that we have strong access to broadband throughout the state, and increasing fiber optic cables, and we know that will strengthen Wisconsin enormously. Next, moving over to the area of higher education. Many of you probably noticed President Tommy Thompson, former Governor Thompson, has really heralded the investment that Governor Evers has put forward in investment in the UW system. And I know with UW La Crosse being so strong, and also the Western Technical College programs you have in the La Crosse area, he's proposed $36 million. So the governor, being a former superintendent of schools, member of the Board of Regents and the technical college system, certainly believes this is so vital to our future. And as our economists will tell you, whoever has a world-class, trained workforce is going to own the future. So very important investment. We hope you'll, with La Crosse, this being so important in your area, hopefully you can convince your legislators to support this as well. Healthcare, very important. The area of telehealth, in the pandemic, we've seen that that's been one of the best ways to serve many people who have been infected, but it's also important for specialty professions. We have a shortage of psychiatrists in the state, for instance, and being able to serve people through telehealth means they can serve more people more efficiently. And then finally, one issue that there does seem to be still a division in the legislature, and that's with the expansion of the Medicaid dollars in Badger Care. Right now, Wisconsin stands to lose $620 million if we do not accept the MA money. And the thing that's so unfortunate about this, and I understood when Governor Walker was reluctant to accept this money, he said he didn't know if administrations would continue to support this MA funding, even though I will say the law allowed for people to opt out at any time. But nonetheless, I could at least understand that. But with President Biden being in office, you can be assured for the next 4 years, there will be no retrenchment in this. And so we're talking about $1.2 billion that Wisconsin will leave on the table. And already, just in the last couple of months, there's only 12 states. We're one of only 12 that do not accept these fundings, and Wyoming and North Carolina and Utah have all looking to move to accept this. And so we're subsidizing other states. So even if people didn't care about health outcomes, which I'm sure all of you do, because we are, especially in the pandemic, we recognize, if you don't serve people through healthcare coverage, they're just going to be served through the emergency room, which is the most expensive, inefficient way to deliver healthcare. And that's why this is so important, not only financially, but also in terms of healthcare sustainability and healthcare access. Moving on to the next slide, sustainability and conservation. Very important. There's always been strong bipartisan support for the Nelson Stewardship Program. The governor would continue that with a $7 million addition in bonding authority. Something very important, I know the western part of the state is flood control, and the governor would invest $10 million in municipal flood control and repairing and restoration, and $40 million for replacement of lead service lines, and also bolstering our Wisconsin Disaster Fund, which is so important. A couple other items, and I won't go through each and every one, but pilot program for supporting flood proofing and research into trying to ensure that in our brutal winters that we have sometimes like this year in Wisconsin, local roads can sustain that. Also PFAS, which Secretary Paff could probably talk in great detail, because it's also PFAS is invading our crops in some cases. Of course, I know in French Island there, PFAS has hurt the quality of water. They've had to resort to bottled water. So nobody needs to remind anybody in La Crosse of how vital this is. And we really need to get a handle on PFAS. And then additional funding for counties to support conservation staff, 3 additional conservation staff. Other key investments is infrastructure, $162 million for our state highway system, $75 million for multimodal transportation. La Crosse is strategically positioned and, very important for getting, goods to market. And, you can see a couple of the other key investments. One more I'll highlight here is workforce housing programs. I know I talked to CEOs all over the state that pre-pandemic could not find workers that they could have move into the area because they couldn't afford housing. So this is very important to get money out to localities to develop stronger workforce housing that people can afford to live in. I'll end on this note with the American Rescue Plan, Act of 2021. The governor announced just yesterday, so hot off the press, that this is where his priority would be for the funding that we have coming in. He would allocate $2.5 billion to support tourism, to help support businesses with the We're All In grant at $600 million, $500 million towards continuing statewide pandemic efforts, $200 million, of course, for the expanding broadband. So he's indicated how important that would be. So now just to end on a couple notes regarding the Department of Revenue. We created at the governor's request a business development and government relations unit. And you never have to hesitate calling the Department of Revenue. Why can I say that so confidently? Because we tape record every call. We have everybody fill out a survey, about a third of the people do, and we get ratings of 98.9% in terms of approval ratings for the knowledge of people and people being able to help people with their calls. So we hope if you ever have questions, you'll reach out to us. It's part of our R&P unit. And we also have critical data on our website. We hope you'll access how to start a business, where to go for workforce, data analytics, becoming a vendor with the state, and tax incentives, which have always been part of the Department of Revenue. Our R&P division puts together weekly economic reports and quarterly economic outlooks, and you can access all of this through our internet. You can see just a sample here of the kind of bar graphs and pie charts that they put together. And if you email us at doreconomists@wisconsin.gov, we'll send these reports out to you. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you this very key information. And I don't know, John, if you want to have questions at this point or wait until our economists are finished.
I believe we were going to wait until the end.
Okay, so then I'm going to turn it over to John Koskinen. John, who's our senior economist at the Department of Revenue, who's probably no stranger to y'all. He does a terrific job at making very complex economic data very understandable. And so he's got a terrific presentation. It'll use some data, what's going on around the state. And I think Bob Schmidt will talk a little bit about the Crosse Area. So let me turn it over to you, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. All right, let's see if I can get mine. There we go. Turn that up, try. And we're up. All right, over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to do a quick run through of the pace of Wisconsin's recovery through the COVID contraction. We will discuss how we've proceeded through the recovery. We'll demonstrate what I think is the critical divide and is unique about this recovery is the goods sector has recovered faster than the service sector. And then we will explore the remarkable recovery and expansions that occurred in manufacturing as a result of that. Before we were so rudely interrupted, we were in a situation a year ago where we were humming along very nicely. The state's unemployment rate was 3.3%. Payroll employment was almost 3 million, a record high. Median household income was at a 20-year high. Poverty at an all-time low. Health insurance covered 94% of the state's residents. Then this happened. Between first quarter and second quarter, we endured the sharpest economic decline in U.S. history. Arrayed here are the largest declines by quarter in post-World War II history. The worst, without a doubt, was second quarter 2020. But in addition, this first quarter 2020 was also in the top 10. For Wisconsin, our real GDP fell 32%. That was ranked 36th in the US, so we were in the bottom third in terms of how badly we were hit. We were below the US average in terms of the pace of the contraction. We lost over 480,000 jobs over the course of 2 months. That's make this akin to watching the flight path of a marble roll off the table. Fortunately, at the federal level, there was a very timely implementation of stimulus to reverse the pace of the contraction. Stimulus funds clearly lifted Wisconsin in second quarter 2020. We received on an annualized basis about $37 billion worth of stimulus funds. And if we look what happened, our change in personal income, we actually gained 21 billion that. But in terms of, if you compare it to what happened in work earnings, farm income, proprietor's income, those were all substantial losses. Without the impact of the stimulus funds, in particular, the economic impact statements and the PPP loans, we would have found ourselves in a much deeper contraction than we actually had. Peter has already alluded to what happened through the CARES funding and how we've targeted the economic support. Through December 17th, we allocated all the amounts. First focus, of course, was on healthcare, but the second was economic support that Peter outlined. As a result, we've came back sharply in third quarter. After your record drop, you had a record gain in terms of real GDP. And for the state of Wisconsin, we similarly experienced a sharp rebound. If you were paying extremely close attention, you'll see that we actually did slightly worse than the US in first quarter and second quarter last year, but we did far better in third quarter coming off the rebound. We've actually recovered at this point 243,000 jobs. We've recovered about 60% of our job losses that we lost over the 2 months. Now, what's going on in the economy is what I call cross currents and riptides. Depending on which industry you are in, you can view the recovery as an immediate bounce back, V-shaped, very powerful recovery, like the hardware store that Peter alluded to, or you can find the rebounding industries, those that are gradually recovering, or you can be in that category that are still deeply challenged. And those are recessionary related industries. The fault line, as I alluded to, was between goods and services. Spending on goods actually came back by third quarter this past year and is running well ahead of pre-recession levels. So total consumption spending is about pre-recession levels, but it's the service sector that is lagging. We see that even in our own sales tax data. Basically, if you're on the retail trade side of things, you're seeing a gain in taxable sales. Only on the taxable service side, particularly accommodations, arts, entertainment, restaurants, those are the ones that are suffering. We also see a variation in the impact of the recession across the state. Basically, if you're red, you're primarily a tourism related destination that requires mass entertainment like stadiums and arenas and festivals or water parks, etc. Those are the areas where we saw the biggest impact. The rest of the state, where it's more diffuse and they lack that kind of thing, actually did quite well. What's happened is the whole concept of better off at home has transformed the economy. If you're not going to motion picture theaters, you're investing in streaming services or home video. If you can't go to the gym, you're investing in sporting good equipment. If you're worried about contagion from sharing rides and taxis, you wind up spending more money on your personal transportation and motor vehicles. So we see an increase in spending on autos and trucks. And nursing homes. If you're concerned about taking care of an elderly parent in a nursing home, your option, of course, is to provide home health services, and that seems to be in a shift that's undergone as a result of the pandemic. And if you can't go out to the tavern because of limited capacity, you'll wind up making the brandy old fashioned at home. That's exactly what's happened. For everyone else, if you're in a virtual office, streaming meetings such as this, or you need to have the child at home because school is part-time or fully virtual, you'll wind up spending money on information processing equipment to support that, as well as furniture to provide the desk that wasn't there before. Now, as we think in terms of that three boxes, as I put it, we'll go through some of the revived industries. Retail sales has actually at this point has rebounded to almost 10% of pre-recession levels. Again, that's sort of spending on the good side. Initially, in the early stages of the pandemic, there was a big disconnect between the bricks and mortar sales versus the remote sales. That's closed of late, but where the bricks and mortar sales were hit hard in the early stages of the pandemic, even they are now reporting year-over-year gains. Motor vehicles I've already alluded to. At one point, the auto industry in the United States was actually shut down, roughly from mid-March last year to the end of mid-May. Since then, production has resumed. Right now, they are struggling with supply issues. Things are in such high demand, critical parts aren't there, so some of the assemblies are being put off or plants closed down until they can get enough semiconductors. Single-family home construction has completely recovered. It's running about 15% ahead of a year ago. Healthcare employment on the rebounding industries is now recovering, led largely by ambulatory care. The doctor's offices and dental offices that were closed during the pandemic are back to hiring. For other services, it's roughly the same situation, not quite back to pre-pandemic level, but it came back very quickly. To go through recessionary industries, travel is the one that's suffering most. This is air travel with a knock-on effect on aircraft orders. Destination travel in particular has really suffered, way down below prior levels. Spending on hotel accommodations is running at about 30% of pre-recession levels. Mass entertainment at this point, whether it's spectator sports or movie theaters, is practically at closer to zero than last year's levels. Food services has not recovered because of restrictions on restaurants. It has basically come up to a level at about 80% of where it was, and it's sort of stayed there or declined slightly. The big surprise, though, is sort of what's happened in education. Because schools have been shut down or part-time, local public education has seen job losses that we've never seen before. That hasn't come back and won't come back until such a time as we get all the schools open 5 days a week. And it's not just local schools, it's the same is true for higher education, whether it's state higher education or private higher education. Those are other locus of job losses. We've seen the same thing in this state. It's not just a national phenomenon. we've seen it for state higher education and even private higher education in the state of Wisconsin. For construction rebound has been led by residential construction. Total value of construction put in place is running way ahead of pre-recession levels this year, primarily on the housing side. For us, our housing construction level is now running at levels that we haven't seen in 12 years, and we're running way ahead of pre-recession levels. And not all states can say that. We are one of the states for which housing construction is running at a faster pace than the US. We're at about 11% compared to the US average was 6. And these are the 2020 numbers over the 2019 numbers. For manufacturing, the bounce back came with the rebuild of the goods industry. You see a fade in that final month in February. That's related to the poor weather and collapses of Texas and petroleum refinery, supplies of semiconductors adversely affecting everyone else. So sort of critical supply management issues. But for us in the state of Wisconsin, after the April collapse, Wisconsin manufacturing rebounded to the strongest level since mid-2018. The good news is for us, those durable good industries with a large Wisconsin presence are showing big year-over-year gains at this point. And indeed, in fourth quarter 2020, we added more manufacturing jobs than any other state. Labor markets, Wisconsin's one of those select states for which the labor unemployment rate is now below 4%. If we look at our surrounding states, Iowa is comparable, but we're way ahead of Illinois, for example. Our unemployment rate experience varies considerably by industry in this country. It's basically you have leisure and hospitality remains in a deep recession, but manufacturing is, as Peter was alluding to in terms of the workforce preparation, we're starting to deal with those kinds of labor shortages already that we had pre-pandemic because we're getting very close to full employment in those areas. Export industry has been helped by the fact that the trade weighted value of the dollar has been declining since it peaked in the spring, with the result that our exports have now not only recovered from the spring COVID contraction, but they're running strongly ahead of the same level of a year ago. The key to progress is what Peter was alluding to in terms of the vaccine progress. The best economic stimulus that we can have in some respects is if we can get our population fully vaccinated so some of those very industries that are suffering on the service sector side can rebound. I'm pleased to suggest here that Wisconsin has made substantial progress on COVID. Our caseloads have plummeted now to the point where if you look at when we were running roughly almost 6,500 cases every 7 days, we're down to around 468. So we're running at about 5%, 7 days, 5% of where we were in the peak condition. Similarly, hospitalizations have declined to practically early spring levels. Our COVID situation has been very good right now in terms of number of cases per 100,000. We rank 47th overall, and in terms of hospitalizations, we rank 40th overall. Now, for our outlook, the good news is the conditions look much better than a year ago. As we prepared our forecast, the U.S. forecast is expected a full recovery by second quarter this year, while our November outlook displayed here was suggesting we're going to have our unemployment rate declining and we would be at roughly 5%, and our employment continuing to rebound. I'm pleased to report that really the Wisconsin economy is running way ahead of our November forecast at this point, with the unemployment rate about 3.8%. Household employment is running ahead of forecast. Wages and salaries substantially ahead of forecast, all of which suggests that we need to redo the forecast, which is in fact underway. While it's not ready for publication yet, it will be released shortly. And as Peter alluded to on the websites, if you want an update of our report when it's published, I provide the link there. All right, at this stage, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Bob.
All righty, thank you. Just gotta grab the right slides here. So that should have popped up with La Crosse MSA and county regional data. So what I'm going to do is go through some of the kind of local economic indicators, comparing La Crosse metropolitan area, that's the MSA, to the broader state economy and a couple different metrics. Just a little note on what we're talking about. We're talking about the La Crosse metro area. It's actually a federally designated metropolitan statistical area that includes just across the border into Minnesota and in Houston County, and then La Crosse County itself. But it's mostly La Crosse County, so it's something we can use to look at La Crosse. And I'll just kind of use the term La Crosse in describing the county or the MSA, the metro area, as we go through this. So looking at Wisconsin versus La Crosse in terms of where the employment concentration is, Wisconsin is a manufacturing state, one of the most heavily concentrated manufacturing states in the country. It's 16.2% of all employment. La Crosse is only at 10.9, and that's largely just a factor of what else is going on in La Crosse, and we'll find out kind of why that's the case in the next one. And it's education and health, and I don't think that's that big of a surprise given the presence of a UW campus and Gunderson and all the other activities that are going on in those sectors. So La Crosse is a bit heavier than the state in terms of those particular subsectors. Overall, employment has improved. John, went through at the national and state level. Things are looking much better and better. Here's just kind of a side-by-side comparison of how Wisconsin and the La Crosse metro area are doing. Obviously, the April year-over-year comparison looked very, very bad in 2020. And if you flash forward to January of 2021, things have improved in the state and actually have improved a little bit more in La Crosse. So La Crosse, and this is a theme that'll be captured through several of these data points, La Crosse is doing better as a whole than certain portions of the state and the state aggregate itself. The recession, obviously, as John pointed out, did not affect industries evenly, leisure and hospitality being the biggest victim of this. So if you look at these year-over-year changes in employment by sector in April, I mean, down 50%, and it's roughly the same between the state and the county or the metropolitan area. That's pretty incredible decline. Flash forward to January of 2021, things have recovered. Again, this is a case of La Crosse kind of outpacing the state in terms of its recovery, which is just a further indication of the robustness of the La Crosse area economy. Employment losses did not spare any sector. In overall figures, if you look again here, Wisconsin versus La Crosse, and we're looking just the private education and health services, which is a large piece of the La Crosse area economy. Again, outperforming the state, basically back to where things were as of January 2021 compared to prior year. Manufacturing, albeit a slightly smaller sector in La Crosse, a slightly different story here, hit a little bit harder, but a strong recovery, not quite at the level of the state recovery as a whole, but again, this being a slightly smaller industry in the La Crosse area, it's not as damning as other parts of the state. Shifting gears a little bit to the sales tax revenue. So now we're getting into kind of the data that we have access to, specifically the Department of Revenue. And I know the Secretary mentioned this, we do have a ton of data on our website for you to kind of slice and dice the sales tax returns by geography and industry. Here's just a couple of highlights. So in this case, we're looking at a combined period of March and April versus November and December. Again, looking at La Crosse versus Wisconsin. And in this case, it's not as much of a decline in March and April in La Crosse, and then correspondingly not as much of a recovery, if we want to call it that, moving forward. It's no secret, and it's pretty obvious that the biggest hit has been to the accommodations and food services industries, or leisure and hospitality, or tourism, whatever you want to call the mixture of these two. Again, kind of staggering declines in what we saw year over year for the March and April period, in both cases for the state and La Crosse. But then looking at November, December, certainly down quite a bit. And this is kind of a function of what both John and the Secretary talked about. The vaccine is kind of the key to opening up, especially in this industry. I did take a look at the La Crosse information on the DHS website, Department of Health Services, and La Crosse County is one of the highest in terms of percentage of population with at least one injection of vaccine. So that bodes well for suggesting a quicker recovery, as seems to be possibly the case in La Crosse versus other parts of the state. But time will tell how that goes. But that's the critical thing, is to get those vaccines out there, and it's working in La Crosse. So job well done by the La Crosse health people. Moving on to some long-term trends. Again, this is something too that factors into the vaccine and recovery and overall health concerns. So the median age in Wisconsin by county is just under 40. La Crosse is slightly younger, again, given the presence of a larger UW institution, that makes a lot of sense. But that also suggests, some benefit to the county in terms of the vaccine being effective and lower health concerns than other places in the state. Some longer term trends on employment, again, suggesting the robustness of the La Crosse County economy. Slightly faster growth in the state between 2000 and 2019. Those are kind of two pegged years. Obviously, a very different story along that path, depending on what you're looking at in terms of what happened during the financial crisis and Great Recession. But pretty strong growth compared to most of the state. Switching gears yet again, this is equalized value. So these are the taxable property values in the state and in La Crosse, and this is county specific. Again, we're kind of looking at a long-term trend, what happened in La Crosse versus the county, and a couple different measures here. So in this case, we're looking at the year-over-year change in the equalized values of all of the property combined. So really what we're looking at here is the fact that Wisconsin dipped further than La Crosse County in terms of the changes in the property values. And La Crosse has kind of held that lead against the county through most of the years with just a couple of those intersections in a couple different years, but pretty significant property growth in terms of value. Looking specifically at residential, and this one's kind of a key to what happened in 2008, 9, and then the recovery with the housing bubble. Just close that. We saw a steeper decline in Wisconsin than we did in La Crosse County. I mean, some counties were literally decimated in terms of residential values. La Crosse County was able to hold that line closer to zero in the year-over-year changes, and then expand more quickly than the state of Wisconsin as a whole. So La Crosse's residential market, and I'm sure most of you are aware of this, is seemingly much stronger than the rest of the state taken in aggregate. Obviously, there are pockets across the state with slightly different stories. And then looking at commercial properties, again, a similar story, not as much of a decline as a result of the financial crisis, and some more expansion, some kind of seemingly outlier years. If you look at the kind of 2017, 2019 peak and valley there. But again, same kind of trend as the state of Wisconsin with a little bit of a boost on the intercept for some of these figures. I believe this slide was actually, or this chart was included in one of the secretary slides. I did just want to take a second to plug some of our data visualizations that we do have available. This is the one that's on the property values across the state. You can slice and dice by geography, by property class, create new and updated pie charts, trend some bar charts along the way, and just get a better sense of how property values are changing across the state. We have 30 plus visualizations now on our website. Each of the major tax types kind of have their own suite of visualizations. And then we also have information on state and local economic indicators, and then a ton of data that a lot of people are very interested in that's not available elsewhere in terms of local government finance. So we have a local government dashboard that's just kind of a series of drag and drop menus to see how your local government is spending money, where it's getting its money from, and then comparing that on a kind of per capita basis to all other places in the state. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in that type of information, or a lot of the information that fed John's slides, to check out our website. We do have links in the presentation which can be made available to anybody, or it's just on the DOR page, hit the reports button. And I will say too, if you have any questions, feel free to email us. We will respond. We probably won't have the answers to all questions, but we'll certainly know where to look, and we'll do our best to help people out with any questions they have on the Wisconsin economy or taxes or the intersection of the two. And with that, I will open it up for questions, I suppose.
Sure. Thank you, Bob and John. One question that we did have come in, and it said, given the unemployment rate is not the best measure of labor markets at the moment, what other things are you looking at and searching for over the next 6 to 9 months to really see the progress of the recovery, other than just the normal unemployment rate?
All right, I guess, Bob, do you mind if I go first on that?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the first thing you track, of course, is employment itself. The unemployment rate is derivative of what's going on in the labor force. So payroll employment is probably your best overall indicator as to what's going on with the employment. The other of which is I've become more and more a fan of the data that the Department of Revenue receives, because it isn't survey data. It isn't revised all that often. So for us, one of our best indicators are what are we getting on withholding on the wage side is probably our best indicator of what our overall conditions are. That and state sales taxes. And it's timely. We don't have to rely on anybody else to do it. And after working with it for years, we started getting an intuitive feeling for it. From that, I can let Bob expand on that answer.
Yeah, I think we do look at two things primarily on a fairly frequent basis, and that's withholding, as John pointed out, and the sales tax returns themselves, because we can kind of pinpoint where in the taxable portion of the economy things are improving or in decline. I think, though, what is crucial to pay attention to now over that kind of 6 to 9 month horizon is the employment recovery itself, in terms of just raw number of people going back to work in each sector. Something that is harder for us to track is the kind of quality of the recovery versus the quantity. One of the issues with the withholding piece is that it's because it's tied to income taxes. The state did not experience a significant drop in income taxes at the onset of this recession, and that's largely due to the wages attached to the industries in which we saw job loss. So in that case, withholding will tell us that kind of broader picture of how things are going. But if we want to know within that picture how things are going among different groups, that's where we have to kind of dive into some additional data. One thing to point to is on our website, and this is something we kind of stole from Census and slapped some new filters and metrics onto, is the Census Household Pulse Survey, which goes out and allows people to respond to their household economic conditions in response to the pandemic. Did they miss a mortgage payment? Do they expect to miss a mortgage payment? Have they experienced an income, a job-related income decline? And that's something that we can dial into different income levels in the state versus the rest of the country, or just different income levels within the state. So that's something too that we look at just to see how people are doing. It's kind of a super detailed consumer confidence metric, if you will.
We have another question coming in. With the new rounds of federal stimulus dollars coming in, where do you believe, and it's been relatively short amount of time since we've received those, where do you feel that this is going to make the largest impact for the state of Wisconsin?
I would defer to Peter on that one.
Well, I think that, two things I think would really stand out. One is, I think, on business development and helping those businesses that have been hardest hit during the pandemic. I think I showed that slide of where the governor intends to focus investments from the American Recovery Act funds. And clearly, he's looking to try to help, the restaurant, the lodging industry, retail establishments, all of which you heard from our economists have been the hardest hit by far. And when they talk about the K-shaped recovery, those are the ones that are really particularly hard hit. So I would say, that would probably be the most important, because, when you look at the inequities that this pandemic has produced, both from large versus small businesses, from marketplace versus brick and mortar stores, from maybe higher wage employees versus lower wage employees. Clearly, we need to level that out. And one of the things, ironically, is it actually helps the economy more, because for lower wage workers, they spend every nickel they get, and that ripples through the economy. So it's very important economically as well. So I would say that primarily. Secondly, though, I think it's going to do a great deal of good for local governments. Both President Biden as well as the governor in his budget, focused on trying to get more support for local units of government. They've been particularly hard hit too, because as commercial properties have not been able to pay their property taxes and being so reliant upon those property tax payments. I think this will make a big impact.
Thank you. Overall, obviously lacrosse has been hurt as well as everyone else, but it looks like the recovery for lacrosse has been going fairly well. What do you think are the key contributors to the lacrosse county and the lacrosse area? What are your one or two takeaways as to why maybe we've been better off?
I think part of that's just industry mix. I think lacrosse, and each recession is different. You're gonna have recessions that affect the financial sector, recessions in this case that affect mostly hospitality, leisure and hospitality. And the fact that lacrosse is not overexposed to some of those industries, I think has been the strength. Also, I mean, education and healthcare being what they are, fairly stable industries that provide growth and a lot of spin-off effect, I think has benefited the region as well. So I think, like most things, when I respond to questions like this, the answer is typically industry mix. It's a very different story if you look at, a certain corner of Sauk County in Delton, Lake Delton in the Dells area, and just see what's happened there in terms of theme parks not opening and hotels not being full. They just don't have as many different things going on as lacrosse, which has proven to be a very good thing over the past year.
All right, I don't have any more questions coming in. So I do want to take the time and say thank you again for everyone that's been in attendance. I want to say thank you to our advocacy sponsors and a special thank you to John from Wipfli and the team in lacrosse. And also thank you, Peter, John, and Bob for your presentations and insight and information. To everyone else, have a fantastic day and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it very much. And, if you have follow-up questions, you can also email us at dorsecretary@wisconsin.gov. And I have to end just by also a little tip of the hat to my former colleague, Jen Schilling, who I know is now helping your economy as opposed to helping politics. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you.